Welcome to everybody to the Tuesday, September 12th, 2023 meeting of the Westford Select Board. We are going to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance led by our Director of Public Works, Steve Cronin. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thank you for that, Steve. Sorry. Next up is open forum. And I think there's a couple announcements. First one here I see is the Friends of the Poor Walk for the Society of Vincent de Paul on November 10th. It's from 8:30 to 11:30, beginning and ending at St. Catherine's. So yeah, please be aware of that and join in that. Sounds like an important event. And Kristen, you have...
Unless any board member has one first.
Scott?
So I just wanted to say thanks to, I know people leave people out, but we had a storm Friday night. We lost power for, about a third of town. So Kristen was working all weekend. I know Steve was working, Mark Chambers, Joe Targ, all of our police, fire, highway guys. So I'm probably leaving somebody out. IT, we lost servers, we lost backup power. So really great part, all of our town staff pulling together to make sure that we as residents had our power back as fast as it could be. Roads opened up, and so thanks everybody for a lot of hours that didn't go noticed.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Andrea?
So I have two things. First, I would like to thank Kristen and the entire town staff who worked on our retreat last week. It was a fabulous event. I have heard only but positive feedback about it. In fact, some folks have said that it's the best retreat that we've had, despite the heat that we were with. So a big thank you to everybody in town, all of town staff, all the committees and the boards who were there, who were, had their boards and advertising around the tent. It really, it's a great event, and it's a great way to get information out to people. And this year it was really important that the information we got out, people were really interested in and really participated in. So thank you. And then the second thing I'd like to just say is that I'd like to acknowledge and thank our police department. Because for the past 6 months or so, they've been out and about in the community, and I hope that people have seen them. They've done everything from running camps for the kids this summer to stopping kids when they're on their bicycles, making sure their helmets are correct, and giving them out, gift certificates to Kimball's and acknowledging that and acknowledging bike safety. They've been in our schools. They've stopped and bought lemonade from kids who are selling lemonade on the street. And I just think, having a visible presence of our police in the community and really interacting with our community residents of all ages just helps to build trust and relationships with our police department. So in addition to being responsible for keeping us all safe and secure, which they do a terrific job about, they're also very invested, as you can see, in this community and being a part of the community and interacting with all of us. So, and that's not something that they have to do. So I'd just like to acknowledge them and to say thank you.
Oh, thank you for doing that, Andrew. We should also thank Ryan for putting together, Ryan, our Veteran Services agent, for putting together a great event yesterday for the 9/11 Memorial. A great event and a great chance for us to remember and celebrate the first responders that keep us safe. And
I do have a few things. Thank you. I would like to echo what Scott had said about the work of our crews this weekend. They were invaluable to helping to open up the roads, get power back on, clear trees. They helped me immensely. That Westford is well prepared. I was sending reminders and questions, and they had my questions answered before I was even asking them. So thank you so much to everyone on town staff who acknowledged that work for this weekend. It was a tough weekend for most. So I want to thank them, and also thank the staff and the residents for coming to that strategic planning retreat. It was my first time attending that. We had a great crew to plan that event, and then I believe it was very well executed by the staff and the boards and committees, and I too received similar comments that you did, Andrea, that people thought it was one of the best that we had, and I think the committees that presented and the boards that they had got some really good feedback and some information. So I would also like to thank the residents and to coming out to that event. And finally, on behalf of the Land Use Department and the MBTA Advisory Committee, the MCMAC Committee, there was a survey associated with the work we had on the strategic retreat last week, but there is a new survey that was published today, so please visit the town website, Facebook or Twitter, and fill out that survey. We would like responses back by October 6th, so you have about 2 to 3 weeks for that. Any input would be greatly appreciated, so thank you.
Thank you. Any other things from the board? Anything from the public? Yep, Diane?
Diane Wood, 122 Depot. I'm going to take advantage of a captive audience and give a plug for the League of Women Voters Civic Social, which is next Wednesday. This is the first in-person meeting we've had in over a year and a half now. It's being held at Westford Cat. Whether you're a member or not, please consider joining. It's going to be an informal social night, so we'd like as many people as possible coming. So Westford Cat, 7:30 next Wednesday night, the 20th.
Perfect.
That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Hey Diane, sorry, just for people who don't know, where is Westford Cat located?
The address, Groton Road. Nick? 496. 496? 496, I've been told. 496 Groton Road. Thank you. Patty?
47.
Almost. I wonder where the people would have gone. Dunkin' Donuts there or something. Any other things for open forum? No?
Al Prescott, Lakeshore Drive North. I'd like to take everyone back for just a quick moment to the year 1946. World War II has just come to an end. The economy is in tatters because it's been disrupted so badly from years and years of war. And no industry had been so discombobulated, if you will, as the American healthcare system. And suffering in particular were rural areas. And Westford in 1946 was very much a rural area. There was not a doctor to be found anywhere near Westford. So in 1946, a group of doctors from the Boston area started coming out here on the weekends to run free healthcare clinics because this market and this community was so underserved. And they fell in love with this area. So much so they started buying property. These men were sportsmen, and they were men. They were sportsmen, they were hunters, fishermen, and they bought what is now the land that the Westford Sportsman's Club sits on. 2 years later, in 1948, they incorporated that into the Westford Sportsman's Club. That was 75 years ago this year. So, on September 30th, from noon until 4 p.m., we will be celebrating our 75th birthday, and we invite the town of Westford to come to the club and to celebrate with us. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you, Al, and happy birthday.
Thank you.
To the Western Sportsman's Club. Okay. We are ready to move on to the consent agenda. First item on the consent agenda is Town Common and Bandstand request. The event is the Domestic Violence Awareness Month. The applicant is Gail Johnson of our Health Department. The date is October 1st through 31st, and the time is continuous. It looks like we've already approved this once, but they'd like to add solar lights in front of each sign for more visibility, so that's the additional request. Item 2 is the Town Common and Bandstand event is the Ride for Live, Run for Live. The applicant is Jody Merchant. The date is September 10th through 18th, 2023. Again, that's a previous ban request from an earlier meeting. They'd like to add 3 yard signs to the common for even more promotion. Street road closure for a neighborhood block party. The applicant is Maureen Wilczynski. The location is 10 through 30 Byrne Avenue. The date is September 23rd, 2023, and the rain date is the 24th. The time is 1:30 to 6:30 p.m. We also have a special license request. The event is the H.E. Fletcher Club Outdoor Event. The applicant is Eric Santiago. The location is the H.E. Fletcher Club, 11 Brookside Road. The date is September 16th. The time is 9 a.m. to 12 a.m. I wonder if they mean 12 p.m. Does anyone know if they mean 12 a.m.? It says 12 a.m., so let's do that.
I think it's midnight.
Midnight.
Yep, okay. So let's go with that. Street road closure. The event is a neighborhood block party. The applicant is Krista Vassi and Andrea McKinney. Location is 1 through 15 Lillian Road. The date is September 24th, and the time is 1 to 5 p.m. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
All those in favor? Excellent. Our 710 item is a request to approve a change in manager for a Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 138, Section 12, all alcohol club license for the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 6539, 67 West Prescott Street. I guess, Patty, is everything in order for that request?
I do. Rich is here.
Okay.
He's going to be the manager. Brian Fitzpatrick had been the manager at the VFW for many, many years, and now Rich is going to do just as great a job.
Super. Any questions from the board? Okay, if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Next up is our 715 item, National Grid's request to trim 2 and remove 10 public shade trees on Carlisle Road between utility poles 24 and 54 for their storm hardening tree mitigation program. And thank you. You're going to speak to this item?
Yes.
Super.
Good evening, Select Board. I'll introduce myself. I don't know that I've met all of you yet. It's my first time presenting to you, but my name is Kyle Fox. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Works and the Town Tree Warden, which is why I'm presenting tonight. So I'm here to discuss with you a request from National Grid to trim 2 trees and remove 10 trees along the Carlisle Road corridor in what National Grid refers to as their L3 circuit. I rode around with the arborist that National Grid contracts with, looked at each of the trees, and discussed what their plans were and the reasons why. With me tonight is Don Crocker and Pat Smith, both from Davy Tree. They're the contractors for National Grid, and they'd be happy to answer any of your questions as well. They're both certified arborists with Massachusetts and the International Society of Arboriculture. I was worried I wouldn't be able to say that. So as I said, they're focusing on their what they call their L3 circuit, which is, according to National Grid, in the top 5% of at-risk circuits in all of Massachusetts, which is why they're focusing there. We did hold a public shade tree hearing yesterday, as required by Mass General Law, Chapter 87, and there were no comments for or against the proposal. But having seen the trees in person and knowing the reasons that they're asking for this, I am supportive of their request.
Good. Thanks, Kyle, and welcome to your inaugural presentation
Thank you.
for us. Good to have you here. Any questions from the board about the tree removal? Yep.
Is there, assuming that we approve this tonight, is there a timeline as to when they're going to do this work?
They had indicated to me within a month or two.
And will they notify the abutters of when the work is being done?
Yeah, so I should have added that. Great question. So they are also proposing to cut some private trees, and they have made contact with each and every abutter and have approvals from abutters to cut the private trees. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Kyle? Okay, if there are none, then this needs a vote. Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the request as stated here in our agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you very much.
Well done. Next up is 725, request to authorize choice housing opportunities for intergenerational and community endeavors, or CHOICE, to act including but not limited to signing, filling, and permitting in relation to the proposed permitting and project for 3539 Town Farm Road. Are you going to, welcome.
Melissa Robbins is here.
Hi, Melissa.
Here.
Okay.
Good evening, members of the board. Melissa Robbins from Fairlow & Robbins. I'm here tonight with exciting information is that we're actually ready to file for our comprehensive permit for Town Farm Road. We received our project eligibility letter from DHCD. Jeff and Joe will be seeing this application sometime next week. Although your RFP does give us very broad authority, one of the requirements of the Zoning Board of Appeals is that we have the authorization of the landowner, which is you folks. So we're here tonight just to ask for your authorization to file. We'll be filing with 3 separate boards, the Zoning Board, the Planning Board, and the Conservation Commission. I've had one tiny addendum to that authorization, which I have in my hand, which was to add the Planning Board to the header as well, so I don't have to come back before you folks again. So that is my request tonight. I think we'll open our hearing with the Zoning Board of Appeals in October. We're hopeful, I hope Jeff's not listening, to get this done by December so that we can get into this year's funding round. And we're very excited to get going out there. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have.
Great, thank you. Questions for Melissa?
It's great.
It is really exciting, so glad to see this moving forward. I will entertain a motion to authorize Choice Housing Opportunities for Intergenerational to act in relation to the proposed permitting and project, and if we vote in approval, I will sign the accompanying document.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you, Melissa.
Slightly modified.
So we'll take that, we'll sign it, and we'll get it back to you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we're at our 7:30 item, which is to update and discussion regarding the proposed zoning bylaw amendment to regulate firearm businesses. I'll mention this is an opportunity for the internal deliberation of the select board. So this is not the forum that is best for public comment. So we encourage you, if you've got any public comment, to introduce that into the public hearing process, which continues on 7 o'clock or 7:30 on the 18th?
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock on the 18th. So if you're interested in voicing your opinion on this policy, the best place to do it will be then. Welcome, Jeff, and welcome, Chief Chambers.
Thank you very much. Jeffrey Morissette, your Director of Land Use Management.
Mark Chambers, Chief of Police.
All right, and you already reminded folks that whatever comments come up tonight, they're not technically part of the Planning Board public hearing record yet, unless someone forwards it to the Planning Board for consideration. So I think the purpose of tonight's conversation is to kind of pick up where you folks left off at the joint discussion that was held at the August 21st Planning Board public hearing. There was a lot of benefit from public comments that night, and so unfortunately I don't think that gave quite enough time for you folks to do some of your further discussions and deliberations to make recommendations to the Planning Board. There were also some other questions that were raised, and so we did seek some additional advice from Town Council. We did provide their responses in your packet, and then yesterday we provided you with a staff memorandum in the hopes that it might be helpful guiding you through tonight's process. One of the things we did do in that memo is we were trying to remind folks about what our current zoning bylaw does and does not do with respect to regulating firearm businesses. And then we've had a lot of questions about the math. Where did we get the data for the number of licenses? And so we tried to provide a lot more information about that. And just to further clarify that, if you go to the mass.gov website, and there's information there from the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security. So we use the information from that website as of January 1st, 2023. There has been an update as of July 2023, and so some of the numbers of licenses and such are actually, there's been a slight increase, but not a substantial increase. And so one of the things we suggest to you folks, first we want to get some feedback from you folks. You may have had some questions, you may have been waiting for some of the responses from Town Council. We went over sort of a brief methodology. If you figure out what aspects of firearm businesses you want to regulate, we would suggest taking a look at the available data in terms of the number of licenses that are out there, figuring out some kind of rational basis for how many might be expected, either based on average per community or looking at population-based and coming up with numbers that way. Figure out what you want to regulate and then try to pick, if you're going to set a numerical limit, a value that's either at or slightly above that limit. So anything you propose would not be perceived as a taking or unduly restrictive or something that could result in unintentionally creating a prohibition. So there are some ways to prevent that. We have some language already in the draft version of the bylaw, such that if there's a missing element of service, the ones that you want to regulate, it's sort of a relief valve for that. Because in our opinion, it's important to not propose something that could be viewed by others as too strict a taking. And so then to help you folks think about this a little further, we also put in a couple of different scenarios in your packet for consideration. It's not exhaustive, it just is giving you some of the different approaches that could be used if you're trying to further this process and help you think about what you might be in a position to recommend or not to the planning board. And thank you for the reminder, their next public hearing is continued to Monday, the 18th, 7 o'clock. Right now, it is scheduled to be at the Millennium Building, Conference Room B. And so we're happy to try to answer any questions that you folks might have tonight.
Thanks, Jeff. So why don't we first ask questions to Jeff, or any questions, clarifying questions about the documents, then we can internally deliberate, and if we feel like we're able, we can then move to making some recommendation that I believe this group will then take and present to the planning board on the 18th. So any
I
questions
was
for
just going
Jeff?
to ask, so have we agreed that we are going to be meeting on the 18th as a board, as a joint boards meeting, or how is that going to work on the 18th?
The hope is that we can do that, and I'm glad you brought that up. So because I was standing next to Andrea and Scott at the time, I think they're able to make it. Are either of you able to make it on the 18th so that we can go into session? I'm unfortunately going to be on an airplane. 18th is Monday.
Yeah, I know that. Just trying to think. Yeah, I think I'll be able to make it.
Okay. So the hope is that we'll be able to go into session and then share the recommendation directly and then engage in whatever dialogue happens. If somehow we can't meet quorum, individual folks will be there and we'll forward our recommendation to them by letter or some other means. So thanks, Scott. Any questions based on the documents or any aspect of this you'd like to ask Jeff?
Yeah. Jeff,
John.
did I miss something? In this latest version, you don't really single out the gun clubs
So
or anything, and do you include them with just firing ranges? Or?
So I think in all the versions to date, what's important to note is that the existing clubs were never going to be regulated by this bylaw. So their existing uses, they can continue to operate as they have been. Any version of the draft amendments that you've seen would not adversely affect those two clubs.
So as long as they don't do something commercially with weapons or change their nonprofit status or change what they do, it would come under this law, then they would be fine.
In my opinion, if they were to add, say, selling of firearms or selling of ammunition or performing gunsmithing services, they would be subject to this new amendment if it passes. If they want to continue with what they have, that would be allowed as of right. If they wanted to do a modest expansion, that also might not be covered by this. So it all depends on the magnitude of the change.
Thanks.
Did you change the distances between?
Now, this is the same bylaw that we've seen since
I
July.
know, but
So
the one I read, I must have read a different one then.
So if I may, we have not made any changes to the July 14th version of the bylaw. There, however, scenario C in your packet, there was a change to one of the, some of the suggested buffers. The buffer to schools was increased from 500 to 1,000 feet, and then another 2 sets of buffers were removed. And that's just one of the options, and that was based on that compromise meeting.
I misread that then, thank you.
I appreciate creating these scenarios. I think it's a very good, clear way to investigate this problem, so I appreciate you presenting it. That's why.
Sure.
I just,
Andrea?
a clarifying question. So the gun shop that has already been approved, that you folks approved, whatever number we might set for the retail sale of guns, is that included or not included?
That is not included. The way it is written now, it's talking about the number of special permits that would be issued. So that would not apply to anything that receives site plan review prior to.
That's what I thought. So when we say for just throwing out a number, not saying that this is the number, but whatever number we say, whether it's 2, 3, 4, it's +1 for the shop that has already been approved that doesn't come in under this bylaw, correct?
Assuming it comes in, yes.
Yes, assuming it comes in, yes.
Other questions? Yep, Chris?
Yes, so under option C, you do include the information about the setbacks. There's no reason why that language couldn't be included in option A or B, for example, right?
Oh, you mean the changes to the school? Yes. So we want to be clear, we're just giving you three different types of approaches. You can obviously take any combination and
Like
pick and
Chinese
choose.
food, one from column A, one from column B.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions, Scott?
I just have questions, more case of just.
Yeah,
if we're
please,
doing-
yeah.
So, I mean, I've been struck all along that there's been, well, not all along, but since July, that there's been sort of broad agreement around buffers. I'm not inclined to mess with what there seems to be some agreement upon. I'm not, you know, I'm not quite sure what a buffer buys you actually, because historically, there's no correlation between buying the gun and then using it next door. That you tend to, that's not how it works. But I wouldn't mess with the buffers if that's something that people have kind of, you know, coalesced upon. The numbers seem to be that 4 establishments was roughly kind of what, you know, the data had showed was in towns our size. Again, listening to residents, there seemed to be a desire for everything from 0 stores to unlimited, but I think a broad consensus that some could live with 2 and some could live with 4. And what, you know, it could be really simplistic and say make it 3, or it could be a little bit more thoughtful, I think, as you've done, and say, well, what if we had 2 that were retail stores, at most 2 that were gunsmiths or ancillary kind of, so you have 4 total, only 2 are retail stores. That struck me as being a reasonable balance in a town that has only ever had 1 store anyway. So I just throwing it out there, I kind of like those numbers, just to see what reaction is.
Yep, thanks. Any other reactions to the scenarios? I also was gravitating towards that scenario, which I think is scenario B here in the document.
Actually, I think it's A, because it's A, Tom, because B is different. B's 3 special permits for firearm retail dealers and 5 total.
It's a bit more confusing.
It is a bit more confusing.
Right. So if I may.
Yes,
so-
please, since they're your scenarios, please.
Not mine.
The ones you have at least written about.
Sure. So B is by far, in my opinion, the most complex. So in that case, B says whether you're selling firearms and or ammunition, each individual element would count as, I think, it's talking about counting all of the different ones separately. So it's setting a max for retail combined. I think is that one not 3?
Yes.
So, and the reason that is, if you take the average number of licenses for firearms, and you take the average number for ammunition, they add to about 3. So if there was a doubling up, you could get to that 3, maybe in fewer than 3. But the other thing is a separate overall cap when you also factor in firing ranges and the gunsmithing. So a higher overall total, but then a lower threshold for the retail ones that folks seem to have a little more interest or concern in trying to regulate. So it might get you closer to some of the numbers you've heard out there for, say, the retail, but it is much more complicated, and it does put us in the position of trying to justify why are you treating different elements of firearm businesses differently. But they would all be subject to the buffers and the setbacks and the separation distances in version B. It is something that can be done. It's just a little more complicated, that's all.
And in option A, if I read that right, special permits wouldn't be required for gunsmithing or firing ranges. Did I read that right?
Option A only looks at the sales of firearms and the sales of ammunition. And in that, I think, limits to 2, but you can have more than 1 at each, and so that way you could reach the average for each without, with just the 2 licenses, with 2 locations. And under option A, gunsmithing and the firing ranges are simply not regulated by this amendment. So they would continue to fall wherever they fall in the bylaw now. There's no number, there's no separation, there's no buffers to them either, because they're not being regulated. Only the retail component will be regulated.
Okay. Other opinions?
Well, if you just have, say, 2 licenses, and that's all, okay, and then if somebody comes on and wants to add something to it, is one of the factors whether or not we need that service or not, or whether that's a something is missing, like we don't have a range, or we don't have ammunition, or something like that?
So I guess it depends on what aspects you're defining and regulating. So if you're only, say you're only regulating sales of firearms, then you don't need that, you might not need as much that overflow provision to add that missing element of service. But if you're having two or more elements, selling firearms and selling ammunition, and say you only have 2 slots available, I think it would be very wise to either allow each at one location and not be penalized, it counts as one, and each at the other location. And if for some reason someone came along and wanted to sell only ammunition and only ammunition, I think it would be a good idea to have that provision that would allow for the sales of firearms as well, because you don't want to put yourself or having the appearance of running into that unintended effective prohibition, right? Because that is where I think that's a weakness, if there's a perception of that you could end up with a prohibition.
Scott?
So this is a question, Jeff. So for clarity, where does gunsmithing stop? So if I need to have a part replaced, gunsmithing. If I need to adjust a stock to make me fit better, gunsmithing. If I'm taking parts from different guns and assembling something new, is that manufacture?
I'm going to phone a friend here.
I would say yes, because if you're combining any combination, well, it wouldn't just be manufacturing. That would be, if the intent was to then sell that. If you take a frame and a receiver and combine, or sell either of those, that counts as a firearm. So you would need to have a firearms license incorporated with that. But for the gunsmithing, it strictly should be for a firearm that's already been purchased, that comes in for to have work done to it, modifications. There's a big long list of all the things that gunsmiths can do, but it's on existing firearms for the most part. If they are now going to make a custom firearm, then that would go into the manufacturing of the firearm.
Thanks. That's what I want to make sure we clarify that. I think that's a broad concern amongst the population, which is, where does sort of custom building of a gun pop in here, and it sounds like it would be not gunsmithing. So thanks.
I guess I would agree with Scott's point that it seems like the place that we might give guidance, it seems like many of the elements of this, there's sort of agreement. So the area remaining to give guidance is probably the combination of number of retail and other service providing. So basically falling along one of these scenarios. I don't know if other folks have feelings or about what kind of recommendation we might give.
And I think just to say, and I don't know how other people feel, but at least I think there was consensus around this. If the ZBA ultimately issues a permit, that permit counts in the total number. So, if granted, if we're at whatever that total number is, if we're at that total number, the ZBA has to issue they have to go for a special permit, okay? And yes, they could get it or not, but if we're not at that total number, and if there's one left, say, to get.
Law shall be counted toward the limitations on special permits as set forth in this section.
Okay. So Andrew's proposal is that one element of a recommendation could be just to emphasize that section. So thanks for calling that out. Other opinions about how we feel about various numbers of various types of establishments in terms of recommendation? Chris?
I have a question. So, Jeff, with scenario A, for the items that are not, requiring permits, would they still be subject to the buffers that the activities that do require permits are subject to?
So at least is currently written in scenario A, no, because they're not being defined and regulated. Is it possible that that's an option? So in other words, apply the limit of special permits to the retail, but still have those other elements be subject to the buffers and setbacks? We can ask council. That's a little trickier, but we're happy to ask that.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't know if people feel like they're converging on Scott put forward a position, I think I agree with that. That seems to me to be the best balance
That
to
was
me.
which one? Because I think there was some confusion, so.
I actually, it's kind of a combination, I think, of,
Is it not one of these scenarios, Scott?
No.
Okay.
No.
So can
no,
you,
it's.
can you repeat it, please?
It's D.
It's D, all right, Scott's option.
No, it was perhaps too simplistic, but it's like you got two and two, right? You got two
Oh, it
gun
was the
clubs
one
for
that
the
you put forth at
grandfather,
the planning board.
two
Yep.
retail and two other, but that was just,
But
I guess that's what made the most sense to me, and maybe that exact scenario wasn't here, but,
How is that better than A, which is,
because you're regulating the others, and you're not regulating.
so you find that that's fair, potentially?
I'm just, reacting to what I heard from the community. The biggest concern was gun stores. So yeah, if you just don't regulate gunsmiths at all, that probably is fine. Just thinking of how do we,
So I'm
so
misunderstanding.
if you don't regulate gunsmiths at all, that probably is fine, because gun stores are the issue, but it just seemed that a lot of the math was done around establishments, so.
yeah, I think I prefer that they fall under this regulatory framework than not be. So I don't know if I'm reflecting what you're saying, right, Scott, but two that would hold retail permits, there'd be two available retail permits, and then two would be available to provide these other services, but they couldn't provide retail. So it'd be two, so for instance, there could be a gunsmith, a firing range, and two retail. Or it could be that some of the other sites are doing more than one thing. It could be that there's a gunsmith that's also, it could be that someone is a retail that they're also providing gunsmithing services, for example.
So would that still be one, or would that be two?
So ask that same question.
We're mixing, so,
Yeah, we are mixing.
so am I reading that, is there some consensus on limiting the retail to two, but that, are you saying that each retail, you could sell both firearms and ammunition for a total of two businesses? Is that right?
I was saying that, but that's not.
And that's what I was thinking too.
Okay, because the second version B suggested three if you're counting them individually, because that way you're still meeting that average.
You're
That makes
suggesting the
sense.
language that's in A.
Yes.
Where, yes, okay.
I mean, I don't know how many gun stores would sell guns without ammo. I can see selling ammo, no guns, but I
Yeah.
can't see selling guns with ammo, so I just lump them together.
I would say, yeah, I mean, two retail establishments that sell guns and ammo alone, or whatever combination, but only two.
Right.
I'm comfortable with that part.
Comfortable or uncomfortable?
Comfortable.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Yep, with you. And so what about the next option, which is the two for everything else? So gunsmithing and firing ranges, because that's, I think, the next component
Right.
to your suggestion. And so going back to my earlier question, if we do have a permit for, as Scott's suggesting, do gunsmiths and firing ranges fall under the buffers?
Yes, if you define and regulate them, they could be easily subject to those same buffers and setbacks.
Okay.
Question is, do you want to have a number, a numerical limitation for gunsmithing and the firing ranges, or do you just want the buffers?
Can you do, I guess I'm going to throw it back at you based on something you just said previously. Can we do that, or are we going to run into trouble if we do that?
It is more complicated and it raises more questions if you treat different elements differently. Numerically, I think it's easier to do because you can look at how many of them are there, say on average around the state, and how many per capita. That's one thing. But if you're not putting limits at all on some, I think you are definitely treating them differently. If you base it on math, I feel more comfortable. If you're just saying we're going to do it for these and not those, I think that creates some questions. And we can certainly vet that with council too.
I guess I heard, when it comes to the non-gun stores, I sort of heard two arguments from the community. One was there's a concern that you might procure a gun and then use it in close proximity, and so that we solved with the retail question. And the other was that, being the world what it is, some kids could be, affected by seeing any kind of gun establishment near their school. So in that case, that means we would argue for the setbacks for even a gunsmith. So I'm kind of reacting to that concern, but that's just my suggestion.
Yeah, to me, I think staying with the number and staying with the offset and other sort of frameworks in this agreement, makes sense to me, and I think would address the community concern the best.
I think it makes sense, and it seems to me, based on what you're saying, it's simpler. Vis-a-vis the other, okay?
Yep.
Relatively speaking, Jeff, okay? Than some of the other proposals that we're looking at.
So is that regulating all the elements, having them have all the same buffers, and having what limit?
Two for retail and ammo, and 2 for gunsmiths and.
Two for everything across the board? Is that?
No.
Two, so you could have up to 4 establishments, but only 2 could be retail establishments, and either one of those retail establishments could sell, weapons and ammunition. And then the others could be providing some other mix of services that are defined as, shooting range or gunsmith. So you might have 4 establishments. You might have a new shooting range and a new gunsmith and 2 retail. Is what I was thinking.
But if one of the shooting ranges decides that they want to sell ammo or guns, then that becomes part of the 2 retail.
Exactly. So they couldn't, if
Right.
there are already 2 issued, then they wouldn't be able to.
That's
If
right.
there was 1, they could apply, but
Right.
they would need a new.
So can I clarify something?
Of course.
Say you had 2 business locations, and at each of the 2 business locations, they sold firearms, they sold ammunition, and they performed gunsmithing. Are you, where does that leave you for what's left? Are you saying there could be
2 more?
I'm saying there
If someone
could be
else
2
showed
more
up and said they wanted to
locations?
open a gunsmithing, location, that they could.
I'm sorry, Tom, I missed what you said?
Well,
Under
what
Jeff's-
I was thinking is that if you've got 2 and they're providing weapons, gunsmithing, and ammunition, for example, if someone showed up and said that they wanted to open a gunsmithing store, my argument would be that they could. There would still be 2 licenses available for services that could not include retail, but could include gunsmithing or.
I guess because I was thinking you got 4 establishments max, of which 2 can be retail max, and 4 can be gunsmithing for all I would care in that scenario. But the idea was we would cap, what most people seem to be concerned about is the retail sales. So cap that at 2.
Can I
Total.
ask another clarifying question? So it seems like retail and ammunition, for guns and ammunition, is together. Gunsmithing and firing ranges are, in my mind, 2 very distinct things. So I don't know if you want to separate gunsmithing out and allow 2 of those and then allow 2 firing ranges, or if you want to combine those into one. So that's where I'm trying to get clarification from the board.
Then we get to, 2, 4, 6 plus the 3 that are grandfathered, and now
Right,
I'm
so
up to 9.
that's, I'm just trying to clarify what you're lumping together, I guess, so we can be very clear about that.
I was, in my mind, we've got 2 very good gun clubs in town now, and both have got very good firing ranges. So the idea of a private firing range doesn't seem to be part of that market set. So I was going to put them together, assuming that most of them being gunsmiths because of the market, but that it's just one opinion.
Yeah, I think if the scenario we're exploring here is that there's 2 retail establishments and maybe they provide gunsmithing, maybe they don't, and then there's 2 gunsmiths, so now there's no available new license for a gun club, it seems like the market or the responsible, interest in providing services is already met with regards to gun clubs. So I wouldn't feel like we needed 2, 2, and 2. I think if you've got 2, and it seems likely to me that if they're selling weapons and ammo, they might also provide, repair gunsmithing services. So I think you may have 2 sites that have all 3 of those, and then there'd be 2 additional sites that could get a license, but not for ammo and not for retail.
Thank you.
They could have any combination of them, or not. not ammo and not firearms. They could do any combination in the other two.
Exactly. That's
Except
my,
for sales, yeah.
right, that's my proposal. So let's say that they wanted to open a firing range
Yeah.
and provide gunsmithing, that would be fine. They could do that under one of the remaining licenses if the two retail were already held.
Should we clarify that as a commercial firing range? I know in one of the options you had that down. Commercial firing range versus club.
Yes, that was some, and again, this would not regulate the two existing clubs, so.
It's just not needed. Okay.
So does that,
So I feel like we're converging, but let me just say it out loud.
I
I'm sorry?
have based on what you just said, I have a question. So if somebody new were to come in and wanted to, say, with a new gun club or shooting range and gunsmithing, I think you said that would be one special.
In my thinking.
But I guess my question is if we're allowing that as just one, but we've said that the current existing gun clubs, if they wanted to add, that would be one. So I think there might be a disconnect there, is that we're allowing a new club to come in and have and be gunsmithing under one special permit, but the old gun clubs have to apply for another special permit to have gunsmithing. I don't know if that matters, Jeff, or not, but it does seem to me that there's some, not contradiction, but some inconsistency there. I'm sorry.
yes, I agree. So, it sounds like, I think this board at least is in agreement that for any special permit issued to, and again, people keep getting hung up on the existing two clubs, as they could be, if this bylaw happens, pre-existing non-conforming uses, and they could then go to zoning board and end up with a new element or a new firearm business. But that same is true for any, if there's a single-family dwelling in the commercial highway zoning district, that could be a pre-existing non-conforming use. You don't have to be related to the use that you necessarily end up with if you petition the zoning board to change or extend that existing nonconformity. So, and that exists now, you can't take it away, it's state law. So,
I just want to make sure that there isn't an inconsistency that's going to make it difficult for you folks. That's all. That's all I'm trying to.
no, let's,
More difficult than necessary.
More difficult. That's
So,
all I'm trying to,
I just want
address
to
here.
clarify, if we're going for the simple route, whatever that is, it seems like I'm hearing two different things, that a location, it sounds like there may be lumping together of firearms and ammunition as retail, as one license. Is that correct?
I'm saying that if there's one facility that applies for the retail license, they could sell weapons and ammunition, is what I'm thinking. They wouldn't consume two of the licenses.
Okay, so
Consume
one
one
location with any kind of retail component counts as one retail license.
That's what I was thinking.
That's how I think you have it laid out in scenario A.
In A, yes. So we're taking that part of A. You do want to regulate, it sounds like, the other elements of service.
Yes.
But you want a cap, an overall cap of 4 instead of just 2 for the retail, 2 for the gunsmithing, and 2 for the firing range. Is that right? So you're looking at an overall cap of 4?
That's the proposal. That's what we're talking about now.
Yes.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. Any more discussion, or does anyone feel ready to make a motion based on the recommendation we're making?
And are you comfortable with all the buffers as they're laid out, or do you want to pull back or add anything related to buffers?
I mean, would anybody consider the buffer amendment that was, I think, maybe agreed upon by the two parties, which says, we take away the religious locations, but we increase the setbacks to the schools? I think that if that was something that was agreed upon, I think we should entertain that.
If there's agreement on that, I'm fine. I'm fine with that, if that's what Jeff, if that's
Right,
what
so
the
just to be
working group-
clear, I mean, I will say the two sides met, they had good faith effort. They did not reach a final agreement, but the progress agreement up to they couldn't reach an agreement was removing the buffers to the locations where children commonly congregate, removing the buffers to religious uses, but increasing the buffers to schools to 1,000 feet instead of 500.
Yeah, I mean, I particularly think eliminate the required setbacks for, places that serve children under 18 could be a little bit difficult to interpret, so.
I think I would still want to include, daycare centers.
That might be more definable, okay?
I think it,
That's still in there.
That's in there.
Is that still in there?
Schools,
Okay.
childcare. that's
Oh,
still-
all right,
that's under
thank
this.
you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so maybe there's three pieces. One is to emphasize the language that's on the first page here related to, for the purpose of this section, special permit granted by the Board of Appeals pursuant to section 3.2, that piece, and we can read that aloud in a motion. Second piece is to recommend adoption of the, I'm not sure what we call it, the compromise setback changes.
I guess, I'm not sure I'm ready, I guess I'm not clear whether or not there was actually agreement reached on those compromise
Okay.
buffers, so before I'm comfortable recommending that, I'd want to know that that's the compromise that folks actually can agree to, so until
so we can hold on that.
So until I know that, I just as soon leave the buffers the way they are right now in the bylaw.
Any other feelings on this? Basically, the issue, do we just not make a specific recommendation on that? Yeah.
Well, how does that get resolved then? So it goes to the planning board on the 18th, and then what, we have the conversation there?
It could be. I mean, the planning board would list, I guess the planning board who is maybe closer to this discussion would take that input, and then
Yeah.
we would basically say that, I mean, as in many things in this regard, we'd say that is something the planning board would resolve in their final draft.
So-
Unless you have strong feelings either way, then you could recommend something.
Well, I mean, I like what's in section 665 on scenario C. I thought that was reasonable to me, but I'm not gonna die on that hill, so if you folks are fine letting the planning board take it up, I'm okay with that as well. I think more important is that we get the numbers down and.
Okay.
today.
Well, I can take a swing at a motion.
Did you want to add something, Jeff, before?
I just, again, there was a good faith effort, but there was no agreement reached, and there was three people from different points of view, 3 people from each side. So it's not as if they had authority to bargain on, other folks' behalves, but the people in that room, after a lot of effort, that was the closest that they were able to get to a compromise.
Okay. So I think what we could do is make a motion to recommend to the planning board the following components for inclusion in the zoning bylaw amendment. One is just to emphasize the language on the first page of the legal opinion letter. For purposes of this section, a special permit granted by the Board of Appeals pursuant to section 362 of the bylaw should be counted towards the limitations on special permits as set forth in this section. And furthermore, we propose that there be a total of 4 firearm licenses available, 2 of which have the capability of offering retail services, and then the remaining 2 not have the ability to offer retail services. Retail services in this case means selling of weapons and ammunition.
I just want to be clear, it's special permit, not license, correct?
Yes.
Okay, as amended, thank you.
We're also including the language on how, in section scenario A, in which it talks about how those permits would count. So, for example, if you had a firearms, a dealer, and they wanted to sell ammo, that's 1 permit, not 2.
That is the, I think that's the consensus intent of what we're talking about.
Just wanna
I don't know
make
if we
sure
want to
we're
gather up all the language in A. We might have to go through and parse that, but
No, but that specific section, I think, is
that
important to
piece of
note.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So each of the 4 could have 2 licenses. Or you could have firearms sales and ammo.
So only two,
Only two could have that.
only two would be able to do
Those two.
weapons and ammo. Each of those could do both weapons and
The
ammo,
others could do
but there'd only be
the other
two.
together. The others could do a firing range and.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. But there'd be two remaining licenses,
Yeah.
special permits, but they would only be available for the purposes of firing range, gunsmithing.
Gunsmith.
Okay. Okay, is that, can we clean that up enough to serve as a motion?
Wave a wand and make it
I think we
happen,
covered
Patty.
it.
Okay, so I actually sort of get it, but where were you just reading all that from? That's all I need to know.
Oh,
You just-
the memo
the memo
from
Jeff.
Jeff. Yeah.
I have that.
Here, I will.
Thank you.
Do you have Jeff's memo? Because some of it's coming from Jeff's memo
This
too.
is-
And the September 8th, 2023 KP law.
I just,
I have it here also.
I just bracketed it for you.
Okay, I guess, Jeff, for your purposes, is what we're proposing here sufficiently clear to you?
It is.
Okay. Okay, so I've made that motion, so I'll entertain a second.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Just a quick
I'm sorry,
discussion,
any
sorry.
more discussion?
sorry.
No, no,
Yep,
please,
yep.
sorry. I jumped ahead.
And again, so the buffers that are existing are gonna, in the existing, situation, are gonna stay for now. And that we're gonna potentially talk about changing those buffers at the planning board meeting on the 18th.
Right, we're basically not making a recommendation on the buffers. We're gonna take that up on Tuesday with the planning board.
We're all comfortable with that? We certainly don't wanna change, we don't
Monday.
wanna do the school.
Monday, excuse me, Monday, the 18th.
I would like to wait for the planning board.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, any other discussion? I didn't mean to jump ahead. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you to these guys. Jeez.
Thank you,
Appreciate it,
Jeff.
gentlemen.
Thank you to the planning board, too, for
And all the-
administering a complex process.
I think all the residents too that have been involved in this, a lot of involvement, so.
Okay, that brings us to our 8 o'clock, which is an update on perchlorate remediation, and I think we'll be hearing from Andrea Egan and Brent Eigler.
Great. So they're going to come to the table. I'll just tee this up.
Okay.
I believe that it's been quite some time since the board and the public have heard an update on perchlorate. You're welcome to come on up as I'm talking. Feel free. And I was briefed on this several times over the past few months and felt that the town was making some significant progress and wanted to make sure that the board was aware of that and the public was aware of that, especially as there's generally a traditional article on town meeting warrant to fund the mitigation related to the perchlorate issue. So that is why it's before you this evening. So we have our consultants with Woodard and Curran here to present a short slideshow presentation to you, and then certainly welcome questions and answers, and they'll help us define the path forward. Okay, all set.
Thank you, Kristen. My name is Andrea Egan. I work with Woodard and Curran as a project manager. I've actually been working on this project for over a decade, working closely with the town. Brent Eigler has been serving almost as an assistant project manager on this. Also does a lot of the complex data analysis and review and report writing. So, Brent, do you want to say hello?
Hello. So like Andrea said, I serve as the technical manager on the site, so I help support Andrea with different technical questions, help her develop paths forward, and try to keep things moving on a day-to-day basis. And like her, I've been on the project for more than a decade. So, yeah.
Good. Welcome.
Thank you. Great, so Eric's running the slideshow from behind, so if you just
Okay,
want to say next
great.
slide when you're ready to move on, he's happy to help you with that.
Great. So this is just a brief outline here for what we're going to cover tonight. We're going to start with a brief site overview, which will provide some information on the limits of the disposal site and then the different regulatory status for each portion of the site. And then we're going to go into a roadmap of the Massachusetts contingency plan and provide some information on the various milestones that the site has achieved since the discovery back in 2003. And then we'll provide an overview of the current site activities that we're doing right now, as well as the next steps. So next slide, please.
So this slide presents an overview of the two parts of the disposal site. The disposal site boundary, which is the black thick dashed line you see taking up most of the figure, that was delineated based on groundwater perchlorate data. specifically those perchlorate data that exceed what we call a background level. And background can be thought of as a level or a concentration of perchlorate that you might expect to find in the absence of a specific release or discharge. And this is because perchlorate does occur in the environment from a number of sources, ranging from things like fireworks to byproducts of water chlorination to natural deposition from the atmosphere. And so the disposal site really is perchlorate in groundwater that exceeds that low-level background that we calculated. And the source of that non-background or site-specific perchlorate was rock blasting activities that occurred at the top of Snake Meadow Hill during construction of the highway garage, and that was the 2003-2004 timeframe. So like I said before, there's two parts of the disposal site which are shown on the figure in those two colored regions. The one on the right-hand side, which is sort of a pinkish purplish color, that's called the Valley Aquifer. And that's represented by shallow wells that are installed in sandy soils in part of the town's municipal water supply aquifer. The Valley Aquifer portion of the site was closed out several years ago, which means that the perchlorate data satisfied the state's performance standards for a permanent solution, and therefore things like monitoring and reporting are no longer required at that part of the site. The left-hand part of the site, which is sort of maybe a light orange or peach color on the screen, that's called the Snake Meadow Hill portion of the site, and that's characterized by deeper residential wells installed in bedrock. And the Snake Meadow Hill part of the site is still open and includes an active perchlorate pumping and treatment system at the top of Snake Meadow Hill within the highway garage building. And even though this part of the site is still open and active, there is no direct exposure to perchlorate in drinking water due to the ability of the residents to connect to either town water, or some of them have private inline treatment systems in their basements. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Brent. So this slide provides some key timeframes for the various things that have been happening since the release was discovered. And so Brent, as Brent mentioned and went over a little bit in detail, the site release did occur sometime between 2003 and 2004 as the result of that blasting of bedrock to construct the garage at the top of the highway, at the top of Snake Meadow Hill. And it did result in a release to groundwater, which we'll get into in a second. But I wanted to just give you an overview of what the MCP is for those of you who may not know. It's the set of environmental regulations in the state of Massachusetts, which is a privatized program that relies on licensed site professionals to oversee and direct response actions, including investigation and remediation activities for disposal sites in the state of Massachusetts. It also provides details regarding the requirements to do that assessment and that remediation, as well as the timeframes that need to be achieved along the way. So as you can see, the site has transitioned from 2003, when it was first discovered, to where we are at the present through various phases. And that's kind of the way that the MCP works. It is a phased, iterative framework. And so once the site was discovered, what happened next, there was a bit of a delay between discovery and then when the state became aware of the situation, issued what's called a notice of responsibility to the town, letting them know that they are aware that there was a release of perchlorate and that various things had to be taken to address the release. And then in 2008, what's called the Phase 1 Initial Site Investigation was submitted to the state. And what that did was basically presented a preliminary understanding of the site conditions through some limited assessments, and also described a summary of the various response actions that had taken place between the site release and that time frame. And what happened subsequent to that was the installation of a treatment system at the top of the highway garage, and Brent mentioned that previously. That happened in 2009. There was also the expansion of the town's water line along Groton Road to residents that had been confirmed to have perchlorate in their drinking water wells. There was also a treatment system that was installed at a private residence at 95 Groton Road, which could not be connected to the town water due to just subsurface conditions. There was a lot of bedrock and it was up on a hill. And also the provision of bottled water to residents that had perchlorate above drinking water standards, but had otherwise not been connected to town water or had a private system installed at that time. So those activities happened around the 2008-2009 timeframe. And between 2009 and 2012, what's called the Phase 2, Phase 3, and Phase 4 process was taking place. This is a bit more of a comprehensive evaluation of site conditions, a bit more assessment of the nature and extent of the release, and also continued implementation of those mitigative measures to prevent exposures also took place during that time frame. And also of note, in 2011, a treatment system was also installed at the Nutting Road treatment plant, which treated water that was extracted from the Valley Aquifer portion of the site, which is the shallower plume that Brent had mentioned, as that was initially really the area where the site release was first discovered. Between 2012 and 2017, the site transitioned largely into a monitoring situation where we were monitoring the plume, keeping an eye on it, and keeping the site in regulatory compliance through sampling and reporting. And then in 2017, we were able to demonstrate that the perchlorate concentrations in the Valley Aquifer, again, that shallow aquifer over to the right, or the purple area on the disposal, the plan that we had up earlier, the concentrations had actually started to reduce consistently to levels that were below the drinking water standards, which is obviously a very good thing. So we were able to make the case to DEP to carve out that section, if you will, from active response actions under the MCP, and transition the focus exclusively to the Snake Meadow Hill portion of the site. And as a result of that, we were able to submit a partial permanent solution to DEP, which is a regulatory report that we submit to the state that documents everything supporting our findings. And so that site now, that portion of the site is considered to be closed under the MCP, which is a very good major milestone to have under the MCP. Also, as a result of that, we were able to make the case for indefinite bypass or permanent shutdown of that treatment system that had been installed at the Nutting Road plant. So that came offline as well as a result of that. And then just as an aside, in 2017, we also installed another one of those private treatment systems at 97 Groton Road. And then between 2019 and the present, the site has been in what's called Phase 5 status. Phase 5 is the last phase of the MCP, and it's really focused on the continued monitoring to make sure that the plume's not expanding or increasing. And then also this is when we are now starting to transition into doing a feasibility for permanent closure of the overall site itself. And then lastly, in 2021, we also installed the last of the three private systems that we have installed at 99 Groton Road. So again, there's no exposure to the perchlorate now through the provision of the town water line. These private treatment systems, we've completely eliminated any potential exposure pathways. And so Brent's going to go over a little bit about the active monitoring that we're doing right now. Next slide, please.
This table summarizes some activities that are currently underway at the site. These include things like perchlorate sampling to further evaluate site conditions in the active part of the site, the Snake Meadow Hill portion, inspections, operations, and maintenance of the perchlorate treatment system, the Phase 5 reporting, which we submit to the state every 6 months as a periodic snapshot of site conditions, and then something called a tier classification extension, which goes into the state every 2 years. And this provides a little bit more clarity on next steps toward proceeding to a point of eventual site closure. And in general, the town conducts the perchlorate sampling as well as the systems inspections and monitoring with some support from Woodard and Curran. But Woodard and Curran supports the town by doing the data management and handling the submittals to the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. Next slide, please.
So this slide presents the next steps that we're going to be considering and positioning ourselves in the town for, largely in support of permanent solution, a permanent closure, if we can demonstrate that the performance standards have been achieved. So one of those performance standards is to demonstrate this plume stability. So making sure, as I mentioned earlier, that the plume is stable. It is not expanding, hopefully it's contracting. Perchlorate has been out here long enough now, it has reached equilibrium. We've done a lot of monitoring, we're confident in the nature and extent that we've achieved and demonstrated thus far. So we will continue to do that, and then as we proceed down these next steps. But another important thing that we're doing for this plume stability is to demonstrate what's called source control. Now, the source, if you recall, was the bedrock blasting at the top of the highway garage. And so that's the source area. And so we have to make sure, in order to get this site closed out permanently, that the source has either been eliminated or is controlled, such that nothing, no unexpected things would happen in the future. And so because we have this active treatment system at the top of the highway garage called the highway garage treatment plant, what we're going to be looking into now is designing what's called a pilot test for a temporary shutdown of that system with associated increased monitoring of select down gradient wells to monitor groundwater conditions to see if they remain stable or if for some reason they rebound after we shut that system down. And if that goes favorably, then we will able to conduct the last two steps on this slide, including a background evaluation, which we will look at conditions in the site and see if we feel that they're achieving or approaching what we call background conditions. That's a requirement under the MCP to at least just go through that process. And then also do a risk evaluation. So one of the more important performance standards for a permanent solution is what's called the demonstration of a condition of no significant risk, which basically says that there's no elevated risks associated with any residual contamination that may be present. So ultimately, as I mentioned, the gold standard that we're reaching for here is that permanent solution. But if for some reason, when we go through the shutdown test, and it doesn't indicate that we're in a position to achieve permanent closure at the time, we do have other options for regulatory milestones out here, including what's called the remedy operation status, which is a subset of a phase 5 that would eliminate some compliance fees that the town has to pay on an annual basis, or what's called a temporary solution, which also has some associated reductions in compliance monitoring and things of that nature. But again, we're trying to target for the permanent solution out here. And that's the gold standard, and we'll hopefully have some more information to present to this board, next year or so on that, in that regard. Next slide, please. So I think that's actually the end of our presentation. Great.
Great.
Thank you.
Any questions from the board? Yep, Andrea?
So, in looking at the shutdown process, do you have a time frame when you might start that, so we could determine whether or not we're on the right path?
Yes, so we are actively designing that shutdown now. It's going to go in an appendix to one of the status reports that we submit to the state semi-annually, just as a requirement. So the next one's in January.
Mm-hmm.
So I think our goal is to get our design, our proposed design, and submit that in January with our phase 5 status report. And then,
Does the state have to approve
they
that?
do not have to approve it, nope. And then we already have approval from the town to proceed, so we can probably implement that in maybe Q1, Brent? Let's say before the spring, right?
Yeah, seems feasible.
Yeah.
And then how long do you sort of let it run to see what
Yeah.
happens?
So it is gonna be a little bit of a timely process, right? We wanna make sure that we're keeping eyes on things like seasonal trends that might result in different kinds of trends or ups and downs out here. So I think we're thinking like a minimum of 12 months, right?
Mhm.
Of monitoring following the shutdown.
And then,
Once that 12-month period goes through, we'll take a look at the data that we've collected. We're gonna run a bunch of vigorous statistical tests to make sure that, to understand what the data are telling us. And then we'll make recommendations to the town for next steps.
Other questions? So it sounds like we could be, to getting to some final steady state resolution, it might be an 18 to 24 month kind of situation.
That would be the minimum, right? Because that's when we're gonna be getting our data and doing our analysis, and then there's some reporting that we would need to follow up with. But we're definitely getting close, so it's definitely positive, positive place to be, considering the site history.
Good. Okay, anything else? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you
Appreciate
for
the
having
update.
us.
Thank you very much. So certainly if things change or there's new developments, we'll keep the board and the public apprised. I know this is dense information. No one really wants to talk about site closures at 8:15, but thank you very much for doing this because it's really important.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, next up, we are going to welcome Angela, our moderator, and we're going to discuss special town meeting, which is on Monday, October 16th.
And we also have Dan O'Donnell, our finance director, on Zoom, who will also be helping going through the warrants.
Excellent. So is that how you want to proceed, Kristen? We'll start with the warrants and Dan will take us through.
Yeah, so if you want to start, Angela, she can
Sure, okay.
give any opening remarks if you wish.
Yeah, I just have a couple of things. First, I wanted to make sure, if it hasn't already gone out, that there has been the standard letter to the committees and boards saying don't schedule anything for that night that we usually
We'll
send out.
work on that, yep.
And the second thing I'm hoping is that the 3 articles that are on here to be dismissed, that perhaps we can get rid of them and renumber, because I think that's more efficient and less confusing.
Okay.
We're still waiting for some final numbers, and I think Dan could probably explain that better tonight, so we can go through that, and we certainly understand your recommendation to dismiss.
And that's it.
All right.
Thank you. Dan.
So to preview, we do have a 12 article warrant that we're gonna go through with you this evening, so Dan, go right ahead. We cannot hear you, Dan.
I can see that you unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Is it on this, is it on our end? Might be on our end, hold on.
he does look very good.
Much time at the golf course.
Yeah, really.
Bill, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hey, there you are. Hi, Dan.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
I don't know what I did, but it worked. Okay, so Article 1 is approved unpaid bills from previous year. I spoke with Jesse. We don't have any at this point, so as Angela just said, I think we're comfortable eliminating Article 1. That helped trim this up. Article 2, we're appropriating budget adjustments for FY24. We do have quite a few here. One of them is actually to decrease the legal budget. It's the debt service for 51 Main and the J.B. Fletcher Library, which we didn't need this year, so we do need to decrease the debt budget in order to do so. And that has the impact on Article 7, which I'll talk about when we get to that. Article 3 is approved fiscal year 2024 budget transfers. Again, we don't have a need for this article at this point, so we're comfortable removing this from the warrant. Article 4, we first saw this at the annual town meeting in March. It's basically appropriating the opioid settlement funds that we received already this year into that fund, so they're ready for appropriation. For capital, we currently do have 6 projects that are out there. see, we have one for DPW garage replacement compressors for the HVAC system, which isn't working in several of the rooms at the garage. We do need to appropriate funds for the Blanchard Middle School rooftop units while they are repairing the roof this summer. Jeff Goodwin is still working on getting quotes for those, so he's hoping to have those in the next couple weeks. There's $150,000 for engineering for the Stony Brook Bridge resident relocation. We first appropriated $50,000 back in March for the consultant for this. So this is to hopefully get us through the entire project so that the state can repair the bridge. And we have some $350,000 going through Water Enterprise for some forage treatment repairs at the plant, and $250,000 for preliminary design for the new PFAS treatment facilities. Moving on, Article 6 is the placeholder for the Cameron Senior Center HVAC project. We're still waiting on bids, which are expected to come in on the 19th, I believe. Eric, if you want to scroll down. There we are. Okay, Article 7. This is the article that we use to balance the budget each year. I would like to keep this article just in case Article 2 fails, where we're trying to reduce the debt service. We would have to apply free cash here to balance the budget in that long shot of a case. But if 2 fails and we don't have this article, then we probably have to call another meeting in order to balance the budget. So that's my one hesitation, again, we have this article. So Article 8 is to rescind authorized and unissued debt. I worked with Christine Collins on this to go through the list of all the outstanding projects that we have. All these projects are completed and the issued authorized debt is no longer needed, so that we can clean up our books and not have to worry about this anymore. I think we last did this in 2017, so it's been about 6 years. Community preservation recommendations. There is one application out there from Ellen Hardy. It's to rehabilitate the Coldwell Banker real estate offices into affordable housing units. It's a cost of $1,450,000. Article 10 is the slider legislation. It's basically the senior means tested property tax exemption. This expires after 3 years. The original legislation does. So this is the last year that we're able to offer the program unless we bring this back. So this is time sensitive, so we want to wait to special because it needs to go back to the legislature, then to a ballot vote again in order to be ready for next spring. So we did work with Christina on this, and we do have a couple minor tweaks to it, but nothing too major. All right, Eric, next one. So the school bus contract is expiring, so we're going to town meeting to get authorization for a 5-year contract. And finally, we have the zoning bylaw to define and regulate the firearm businesses, related terms in town. So with removing the Articles 1 and 3, we're down to 10 articles.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Any questions for Dan? Do we need to take a vote to remove those?
No, this is just in draft format. We wanted to run through the warrant with you this evening. At your meeting on September 26th, you'll vote to set the warrant and set the numbering and all of that. So this is just advisory only, and to answer any questions that the board might have this evening on those remaining 10 articles.
Okay, any questions? No, great job. Great job. Thanks, Dan. Are you all set, Madam Moderator?
Yeah, I just want to let all the voters know it's going to be a short meeting, I promise.
Wow. I'm gonna hold you to that.
Haven't been wrong yet.
This meeting is recorded, you know.
We'll look forward to it. Please,
Yes, we
please-
do need a quorum for the special town meeting, so we want to make sure that voters do attend.
I don't think that's going to be a problem.
I don't either, but we do need a quorum.
Yeah, so members of the public, please mark on your calendars. It's Monday, October 16th. Is it at Westford Academy?
Yes, it is, in
And
the
what time is it?
gymnasium, 7 p.m.
7 p.m. 7 p.m. Westford Academy on the 16th. Okay, I think we're all set. Thank you so much. On to the next item, consider request from the J.V. Fletcher Library Designer Services Committee for the town manager to enter fee negotiations with Feingold Alexander Architects for designer services.
Great. So we have Ellen Rainville on Zoom and Scott Hazelton from the Permanent Town Building Committee that can walk through this, and I'm happy to answer any questions as well. Ellen, do you want to set the stage of where the library trustees and the Permanent Town Building Committee have been, and Scott can supplement, and then I'm happy to step in after that if needed.
Yes, absolutely. So in early May, Town Manager Lass appointed the Library Designer Selection Committee that was comprised of 2 Permanent Town Building Committee members, Vice Chair Hazelton, Jean Roberts, architect, who had also worked with us for 2 years during the planning and design grant from 2014 to 2016, 2 library trustees, the library director and assistant director, and our representative from CSAC, Beth Perkins. So we went out through the RFQ process. We had a tour. We ultimately had 3 different firms applying, and the group unanimously chose Feingold Alexander Architects, and this was the group, the firm that had done the original design that we've been sharing with the town. So they came back with a proposal that we brought to the joint 2 boards at a meeting on August 28th, and at that meeting the joint boards came up with questions which we brought back to Feingold Alexander. They responded to them, and we had another joint board meeting last evening to be sure all of those questions were addressed and that the format and the editing in the proposal was correct, in hopes that we could bring it to you tonight. So it is now ready for action, and we hope to be able to get started to work with them for 1 year of design development.
Great, thank you, Ellen. Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
I think, yeah, it was fine. We did have a town, what was the OPM that was involved in this process too? I don't know if you mentioned that, Ellen, but so the town had a go-between between ourselves and the process, make sure it's all legit, but it's actually a very good one too, I would say.
Great, thank you both. Any questions or comments? Chris?
So Scott, maybe you can answer this. The recommended additional services, has there been any conversation from the Permanent Town Building Committee, or maybe Ellen from your committee, about taking advantage of any of these additional services?
Such as?
Well, you have the further studies of energy conservation measures can be done at the design development at an additional cost of $15,000, and then there's, if we want to have, I guess, artistic renderings done at $2,000 or so, and then landscaping permanent services at $10,000 to $15,000. In particular, I was interested in if anybody talked about the energy conservation measures and whether it was at all useful to have this service done to see if we can reduce energy costs.
So maybe I could address that.
Sure.
That was part of the original RFQ. The Sustainability Committee helped us with that language, and it's very, very strongly addressed in the RFQ and in their proposal back to us, the steps they'll take for both mass save rebates and for historical monitoring and for getting other energy and utility rebates. I think the add-ons will be the last thing that we're interested in. I don't see the need for more renderings. We have renderings. They are costly. When I look at that list of potential add-ons, potentially a lighting designer might be needed in maybe 4 spots in the library. So I don't think that we're ready to talk about add-ons yet. What we wanted to do was make sure that the items that were critical in the RFQ got addressed, were included in this proposal, and that it would come in at the fee, which they did hold, that was in concert with what the Board of Library Commissioners is seeing as an average and realistic fee.
I'm sorry, so your answer kind of confused me. So they are in the scope of work going to do some energy analysis and conservation analysis, and we don't need this?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So they did cost estimating on new sustainability measures before the town vote at the October town meeting in '22, and the ballot measure in November of '22, and $3.35 million was added to our design budget for sustainability measures.
Okay.
And the RFQ for the designer, that is a critical mandate that they have to address.
So why are they sticking this further services? What further energy conservation measures could be done if we were so comprehensive?
Well, maybe new things will come up that weren't explored, within this 2-year period. Maybe more things will come up. So we'll have to see. One thing that has been promised is a public charrette where they will look at all the potential energy options and solar, geothermal wells, everything that might be available.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Ellen. John?
Now, Ellen, you mentioned, thank you for the answers to my questions that you sent me. You have a new building group. Is that the same group that did the review of the design?
So that group is willing to continue as the working building group, and we would be adding Jeff Goodwin to that group as well. So everyone unanimously indicated that they're willing to continue to go forward and be the working group, and then we would continue to have these monthly joint meetings where there's a report to the combined Permanent Town Building Committee and Board of Trustees, and warrants are approved by both boards and signed by the chair of the Permanent Town Building Committee.
So how many people are on the building group?
I think it will be 8 altogether. I think it will be 8 altogether plus the OPM.
Okay. So how many from the library?
So 2 library trustees, 2 Permanent Town Building Committee members, 2 library staff, 1 sustainability representative, 1 facility director, and then the OPM as an advisor makes the 9th person.
Okay. What function do they have as far as approving change orders and that sort of thing? Is everyone a voting member? Do they have anything to vote on, or are they just consulting?
We'll be making recommendations to the joint board for them to make approval of. And at this point, we won't be looking at change orders. That would be during the construction phase. At this point, we are refining the design that was really design light for the grant that had to be submitted in 2017. So there are, for example, when that grant was submitted, we were going to have gas heat and an electric library. And so we will definitely see changes to the design, and we will be fine tuning, but they're minor changes. They're like flopping the young adult area and putting it on the western wall because children will be in the library after school and can get the sun on the west instead of having it on the eastern wall. They're very, we're at the point where those kinds of changes are easily made, and there's very little change to the building program.
Well, you know where I was going with this, don't you? I was talking about, the Permanent Town Building Committee is supposed to have overall management of this project, and the library trustees in the consulting role. And so in your view, is this arrangement comply with that special town meeting requirement?
Yes, and this worked very well for, 2014 through 2016. We had a preliminary grant, the planning and design grant, and we met monthly, sometimes twice a month, and it was a very similar, at that point it was called the Library Facility Needs Committee, but we had 2 trustees, 2 Permanent Town Building Committee members, only 1 library staff person, It worked very well, and we think that, you know, there's some history on the membership, and we will be able to move forward. And it will be an advisory committee that will bring our recommendations back to both combined boards.
And the idea is that this advisory committee can meet as frequently as needed as a small group. The town building committee's got no desire to be meeting every week through a process. So the advisory committee can meet as needed, report back to the PTBC. So yes, from a town meeting standpoint, the management is still with PTBC, but a fraction of that committee plus other delegates, you know, can operate at a higher frequency as needed.
So this board is really an advisory board?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
I noticed in the
Thank you.
document, go ahead, John.
I mean, I just thanked her.
Okay.
Thank you, Ellen.
I noticed in the document it said the above fee is negotiable, which always seems like an invitation to ask him to reduce price. But is the overall pricing for this consistent with, I guess, what the library boards are seeing across the state? How do we know that we're getting a good price?
So
this was something that the OPM asked the Board of Library Commissioners staff to look at their database. And we came back, there were higher figures and some lower figures that weren't quite credible. So we think that this is about average. And we did push them for more in-person meetings. We pushed, and we also pushed them to hold the fee before we brought it to the two boards, and they are agreeable to that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Go, John.
I mean, because I just have to add to it. So originally they had like one planning board meeting. We wanted to have, I mean, clearly be more than that. So, I mean, most of these additions were based on our experience with other town buildings. So they added all those in with no change to the fee.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
This seemed to be a fairly, quite different estimate than what we had earlier and what we presented to town meeting as far as the construction cost is concerned. So you're expecting quite a few adjustments as we go through the design process?
So the construction costs have not changed in the design budget, but there are things that have been taken out of the architect's quote and put on some different line items. We actually are able to handle this within the budget because you may remember we got an additional grant escalation fee of $829,263. So we aren't seeing tension in the budget yet, John.
Well, the only thing I was asking, they base their fee on an estimated construction cost that was significantly different. And that was what kind of raised my curiosity as to that being quite different than what we had in our budget. Which one's more accurate? And it just looked like the way they worded this, it's going to change. So,
Okay.
I mean, are you comfortable with that number? Are you comfortable with their estimated construction cost and the fee, which is about 13.5% of that?
So it's actually been the OPM's firm and a number of costs that we got, multiple firms got before the town meeting vote and the debt exclusion vote. And we are comfortable with that. And, you know, we're now entering the phase where the accuracy of those projections is going to play out. And we're continuing, we are just launching the foundation's work for fundraising. Some of it will be quiet, some of it will be public starting in 2024. So I don't think we'll know what construction costs are until we actually go out to bid. That's the challenge of this process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Ellen or for Scott? Do we need a vote authorizing something?
Yes, authorizing me to further negotiate the fee and sign the contract.
Second.
All those in favor? Great, thank you. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
Next item up for Molden New Business is to review and act to approve the Select Board and Town Manager Fiscal 24 goals. 24 goals. So this follows up the discussion that we had at our last meeting. Maybe want to put those up.
Great, and just to further round that out, I prepared a final draft for the board's review and lumped the goals that we discussed at our meeting on August 31st into financial goals, cultural goals, strategic efforts and long-range planning, communications, facilities, and town-owned property and planning and disposition. I did receive some individual comments through emails that I did incorporate into the final draft that you have before you. I know Chris had one final suggestion that is not incorporated into this, so we can have that discussion as well if you'd like.
And also, I'm looking at goal 16, and it still says at the end, this may also include master planning efforts and coordination for the broader something.
I made that change. I must have printed the wrong version. I apologize for that.
What goes in there?
May also include the broader master planning for the Graniteville neighborhood.
Thank you.
Any other comments or edits?
Yes.
Yep, Chris?
Yeah, so I was approached by a few people actually during the strategic planning retreat, asking about what our plans are for the PFAS problem that the town faces, specifically in relation to private well owners. But in general, it sounds like that's still a pretty big situation that I believe we need to have some eyes on. So I just reached out to Kristen and thought, is this something that should it rise to the level of a goal for you? I mean, she has a ton of goals already. I don't know if adding one more is important, but or if this one's important enough to supplant one of the ones we already have. I mean, I could make, there's probably one that we could probably knock out, and if I had to make a suggestion, it might be 10, which I think just would happen as a matter of normal, course of business. But I do think that there's a number of residents that are very concerned with this, and as more word gets out about this problem, I think that concern is going to continue to rise.
Yeah, so I would agree that that's not sort of a business as usual level thing, so I think that's a good suggestion. Any other comments? I'm not sure I appreciate the idea that maybe we need to dump one if we're adding one, but I don't know if we need to do that here.
I don't know.
And certainly the water department, the DPW as a whole, and the health department are leading that, but I am happy to continue to make sure that they're leading that in a proper way and that the outreach is the way it should be to make sure that the residents are getting the information that they need. So,
but not just the public public water users.
No,
right?
all
Right.
water
Yeah.
users, any resident or business in Westford related to PFAS education and remediation. Yes.
Okay, so thank you for that suggestion. Any other suggestions or edits? Do we want to vote to approve as amended, knowing that Chris's suggestion is going to show up, or do you want to see the language next time?
I'm comfortable making the motion.
Okay, so you
Second.
second. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Kristen. I think
Kristen,
that's a
for-
good way to organize these.
No, and thank you for your input over the course of the past few weeks.
Next up, review to act and appoint a select board representative to the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments.
So at our last meeting, we had 4 members here. 1 member was not present. We learned from the North Middlesex Council of Governments that the select board actually has to have a member on the board, on that NIMCOG board. It could not be a delegate, which we misunderstood at that point in time. So Anita Jernigan-Gwen was your previous delegate. You wanted to come back with the 5 of you all together to make that decision.
Because we didn't appoint you next.
Well, thank you very much. Do we know what the requirements of this representation is?
I
Like
think
how?
they meet once a month, don't they?
It's definitely once a quarter. It might be once a month. We get certain points if certain people can go to certain events. We certainly have 2 other people, a planning board delegate and a member at large that would attend as well. So we could try to coordinate attendance to make sure that Westford is covered in some way.
Is it a virtual representation? Do you know?
I believe it is still, yes.
It does say here there shall be an alternate member.
Right, so we do have the alternate already named.
Good.
Yes.
I was going to say, we're having a hard enough time coming up with it.
Yeah, it's making it harder, John. Does anyone wish to step forward?
Nice.
Chris?
This is for a year appointment?
Yes, and it's now less than a year because we were supposed to do this in June, so.
Yeah. And it's for daytime meetings?
I believe there's some nighttime and some daytime.
All right, I'll give it a shot.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We'll try to support you as best as we can.
Thank you. Oh, who was the alternate?
Not Bruce Rose. Patty, you don't have the name in front of you, do you? I don't want to misstate the name. Let me.
It's all right. It's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And thank you, Chris, for taking that on.
No problem.
Next, to review and update the charge, to review and update the charge and membership of the Economic Development Committee, to consider requests to appoint town manager seat to Economic Development Committee, and to appoint town planner to alternate seat of land use director.
And before we go on that, it's Jim Silva is the alternate. And Darren Witz of the planning board is the planning board appointment. Thank you for
Okay.
that.
So Kristen, I think this is you?
It's myself, and also, Jeff Morissette is in the room if we have any questions. He's currently on the Economic Development Committee. So, there's two requests, related to the Economic Development Committee this evening. One is to update the charge and the number of members and the type of membership. And then the town manager was formerly on that committee, then came off due to other commitments. Myself and the Economic Development Committee would like my seat back. And then,
Sorry, you can't have your seat back. No.
Okay, well, that's your decision, totally. And then, if for times that the land use director cannot attend, we'd like to have the town planner be the alternate in that sense.
Yeah, from my liaison position on the EDC, I think it'd be great. Obviously, Kristen's got a lot of very specific experience from her history to bring to the committee, so.
So to
Be a great
specifically
addition.
read, they want to set the full number to 9 with a quorum of 5, 1 select board representative, 1 town manager, 1 director of land use management, with the alternate being the planning director, the planner, and then 6 residents at large with 2 alternate members. And they're really getting an uptick of members interested. There's a few new parties on right now, so that's exciting.
Great, so moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
All right, so both
Great.
motions. Great, thank you.
Thank you. Consider recommendation from the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee to appoint Ankit Panda as an alternate member for term expiring September 12th, 2026. I guess, do you want to just mention a little bit about it?
Yeah, I just want to say that Ankit attended our last meeting. He is a Westford Academy student, incredibly enthusiastic, and really interested, and I just think brings a totally different perspective to the committee, and a voice to the committee that would be, that is certainly welcomed. And I think will be a great input, and I see that Joe's here in case he wants to add anything to that, but he just brought a whole lot of energy and enthusiasm to the meeting.
Oh, that's great. Joe, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Not much. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. We would welcome Ankit to the committee, and I agree with Andrea's perspective. He brings a lot of energy, sort of, I mean this in the best sense of the word, youthful energy, and I think we do appreciate that perspective and need it. So we would very much appreciate him being appointed.
And just a matter of clarification, this is a joint appointment between the select board and the school committee. The school committee will be hearing this appointment at their next meeting. We couldn't get the coordination together for this evening.
Great. So Scott's made the motion?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Super. Welcome to, I guess after confirmed by the school committee, welcome to Ankit. And thank you, Joe. Update on request for Boston Road speed limit signs.
Sure. So there was a request from a resident that was made that was in correspondence of your last agenda related to speed limit signs on Boston Road, and specifically related to your 25-mile-an-hour change that was made several years ago. Because Boston Road is currently going to be under construction for the next year to 2 years, we have definitely taken this under consideration. There will be changes to signage made in the area, and we put some information in the packet related to that from the police department and the DPW. So we feel that it's best to, of course, address this concern of the resident, and also state that this is under review and will be brought back to this board once that construction project is almost wrapping up. And I know, Chris, you've been close to the matter as well. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
So I personally would love to see the speed limit lowered on Boston Road. I understand there's some difficulties in doing that, and we're gonna try to address some of those issues with, future improvements to the road. I think that's basically where we're at with this, unfortunately.
I understand it from the thing in the packet, once the construction's over, then the road status, the state of the road, or ownership of the road is gonna change. And once that changes, then we can move forward to change the speed limit. So it's in the offing, so it's gonna happen, fairly soon after the road's finished, or I don't know how soon, but at some point in time. Is that the way you read it?
I mean, that's the way I read it. I think one outstanding issue is the plan at where we're defining what thickly settled section of the road is, and I think that's unclear and needs to be refined, but, I don't know if we need to solve that problem tonight.
No.
But I do think that definitely needs to be solved, because right now you're gonna have people coming from the common where we already have 17C sort of enacted, right past where the Center for Performing Arts are, and then you could seemingly have the speed limit go up, and then we're gonna have a thickly settled section, so the speed limit would go down, and then it would go back up again once you're past Crown Road. It just makes no sense, so we'll have to fix that, I think, at the point in which we're able to.
Okay.
Yep, please. Bob, you want to come
Bob
up to Mike? Yep.
Bob Crackers, 15 Boston Road. I was the one
Could you
who
please
sent
go to
the
the,
letter.
I'm sorry, just if you'd please go to the
Can I
mic.
do
that'd be
this
great.
one?
Sure.
That one's great too, yep, either one.
I was the one who presented the letter. Basically, we fit the description of what Mass General Law says. Houses that are less than 200 feet between them, a quarter of a mile of distance, and that enables us to be called thickly settled by definition by the state. It's up to the board, though, to decide whether to opt in or opt out. And of course, I'm pushing for opting out. I missed out on this, and I didn't become aware of it until a year ago's annual town meeting, and I brought it up. And I was basically told that since Boston Road at the lower end is sparsely settled, the whole road wasn't considered. I did it with my car from 31 Boston Road to the Common is a third of a mile, so it fits the parameters of the state. So I don't understand why this has to be a problem, particularly since the other streets that have been selected, West Prescott, Pleasant, Patton, and Main Street, have less traffic than Boston Road has. And we have a lot of young kids and we have older people. I don't know if any of you remember Lloyd Blanchard. He was hit crossing the road. He was the superintendent of schools. I don't know who those of you may not remember. I think that's significant. I'm also curious, and I haven't heard anything about it, about the number of warnings that the police department has issued for speeders, and then how many fines have been issued to support even the 30-mile speed limit. I don't see why we have to delay it. I mean, you guys were fast to do it for the streets that I mentioned. And I think Boston Road.
So we were definitely not fast. That was well over a year and a half of deliberation and work and effort.
I didn't know about it until town meeting.
Yeah,
And
well-
I stood up at annual town meeting, and you spoke to me, and you said it was sparsely settled, so the whole road was not considered. And tonight-
So rather than having a back and forth, so if you're through making your point, or are you through? Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well, yeah, because I think if you don't do anything, we've lost 2 dogs on the road. Other people have had their dogs hit. It's a dangerous street. When you cross it, none of you live on it, so you don't know. When you cross that street, you take your life in your hands.
Okay, so you're
I'm done.
Okay, thank you. So the request is, I guess that we enter into the process with all possible speed, or all, pursuing the process diligently to consider that. And Kristen, your response is that is part of what we're
It is part of
doing.
what we're looking at. We don't think that it's prudent to do it at this time when the road is going to be going under construction in such a short period of time. The roads that were considered thickly settled and brought down to 25 miles an hour were not considered for reconstruction or rehabilitation that we're aware of. So it's certainly the board's purview if you want to take this under consideration now, but there are going to be changes to the roadway, and we'd like to review that further.
I think that's 2 years down the road yet.
Steve, can you confirm the timeline, please, for the construction? Thank you.
Yeah, so the project is planned to be bid in '25 with construction beginning in '26, essentially. The question over the speed limit on the lower section of Boston Road is essentially a jurisdictional one. The road turns into state highway layout at 41 Boston Road, so the board doesn't really have jurisdiction beyond that point. So you couldn't essentially change or adopt 17C for the lower section of Boston Road now. As part of the construction, the agreement we have with Mass DOT, when the project is completed, that layout will transfer to the town, and then the town will own Boston Road from Main Street all the way down to the 495 on-ramp. So at that point, you could opt to adopt 17C and change the speed limit from the 30 that has been approved now by Mass DOT and would be enforced at the end of the project down to 25 if you so chose.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Any questions for Steve? And then I did see your hand, Bob, if you'd like to come up to the mic.
Steve, I have a question. Do we have to adopt 17C every time we want to do this? Or is that just a blanket adoption?
So the town has already adopted 17C.
Okay.
You would have to choose which roads you want to apply.
So that'd just be a choice of choosing the road then?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Any other questions or clarifying questions?
Wasn't for Steve, it was just
Yep.
a question. I mean,
Sure.
So I get the road's gonna get rebuilt, but 2026 is construction, 2027 is when you're gonna put speed limit signs, right? So 4 years. I think we could act before that, my humble opinion.
Is there a situation with the transition from the state layout to the town layout related to notification of signage, is what I understand, correct?
Partly. So there are no limits, there are no currently approved MUTCD signs that tell drivers that the thickly settled area would end essentially at the state layout. So that would create some confusion for drivers. Essentially going from a 25 up to, whatever's approved at the lower end of Boston Road now, which could be 40. My understanding, and I don't want to speak for the police department, is it does create some enforcement issues if they were to do that. Currently, they are enforcing, I believe, speed limits under 17C now, so even by dropping the speed limit from 30 to 25, I don't think it would change their ability to do anything more in terms of enforcement.
Okay, so what's on the table is that there is some action we could take prior to this road construction and the change in ownership that you've described. That's possible. Is there sufficient interest in the board to ask? I mean, I'd want to have input from police and everybody else if we're going to discuss this. Is there sufficient interest here to have that come back for future agenda items so we can consider that?
Yes.
Chris?
Yeah, so, Steve, if we, the board, decided to apply 17C, are we talking about from the common down to just south of Crown Road at this point?
Correct, yeah.
And to eliminate potential confusion, could we not have speed limit signs placed at the beginning and end of that zone? So as you're entering, you're seeing the 17C signs, and as you're exiting that zone, you see a 30-mile-an-hour sign that's black and white?
So we couldn't place signage because it's not a regulatory speed limit, so we wouldn't be able to put.
But there's signage already there. We already have 30-mile-an-hour signs there.
Yeah.
Well, so
Shouldn't be there.
it sounds like we want to explore it. Let me just get the consensus of the board. So, Scott, you were interested in having it come back. Are we interested in having it come back and considering this? Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we plan to do that when we've got all the people here that we need to?
I would say that, this has been reviewed already by DOT multiple times and their engineers, so we would need to consult with them on what impact this would have on project scheduling, or whether it would need to go through another review or anything like that. And also, public safety would certainly need to be consulted as well.
Okay, so please let us know what time you think you need, and we'll have it come back. Yeah, please.
I guess, why would changing a speed limit affect anything to do with the state's plan for the road?
Because we have an approved design with them now at the 75% design stage, so they have basically they're funding the project, they're basically the project managers in control of it at this point, so they would have to be consulted and aware that we're changing the speed limit, so.
I guess I hear what you're saying, but I'm still left with the question, how does that affect the construction? The same question. And I know you can't answer that, I understand that, but it makes no sense, it makes no sense to me that simply changing the speed limit is going to affect the construction and the design of the road.
Okay, so point taken, and we'll have everyone come back who's relevant to this discussion come back. And Bob, I said I would acknowledge you if you'd like to come to the mic.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I meant,
oh, Bob.
I meant the other Bob.
Bob Jeffries, 11 Boston Road. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Boston Road has done what it always does. It's repopulated itself with children. It goes way down and then it comes way back. I have 3 granddaughters, 12 and under, on that road who cannot cross that road. There isn't any enforcement now. I don't know what you guys are talking about. We asked for some history of this, but there's no enforcement on that road. The de facto speed limit is 50. They come around the corner at the top of the road and they're going 50 when they go by my house. I know that.
I don't.
There are a few of us.
Except for
the other thing is, when this road is finished and it's widened substantially, the speed limit is going to go up, not down. So I think we need to start enforcing now. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Bob, and now this Bob.
Yeah, I'd just like to repeat, from 31 Boston Road to the Common, fits the parameters of the state. I don't see why we have to get involved with DOT per se. If the law says what it says, and we're just finding excuses to not do it. I mean, you did it with the other streets, and Boston Road has more traffic on it. We've got kids that are liabilities.
Yeah. So I think we hear you, and we've already agreed to bring it back to the soonest time we can.
Could you keep me informed on the line so I can?
Absolutely. So thank you for bringing that up.
Something to present. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Tom.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
So as part of that discussion, it sounds like there was some questions about enforcement, so should we make the recommendation that we'd like to have data on how recent enforcement has been handled? You know, are we seeing?
I have it written down, so.
Yeah, and I'd also be interested in what data we have about what the speeds are, because we've.
Yeah, we have the board up.
Presumably
so-
there's a way to measure it.
Well, we have the board up,
We
so
have the
that
board up.
should be capturing it at least at one point.
That works off and on.
Well, it's also really far down.
But whatever we have, we'd
Yes.
like to review.
That's the problem.
Rather than a point up here of reference.
We could move it up temporarily, right?
Okay. All good things. Okay, moving on.
That says, hi, Andrea, as you're going by.
Right, it waves to me.
Moving on. Next item, consider a request to approve adjustment of ambulance billing rates of 400% above Medicare, set a mileage rate of $39 a mile, and to automatically increase and maintain 400% above Medicare as the rates are adjusted yearly. Welcome, Chief.
Do you want a little bit of history?
Yeah, please, could you just, everyone saw it, but if you could just go through your proposal for the public.
We did a pretty good, with the Budget Task Force, we did a pretty good survey of surrounding towns with their help. We did find that we're a little bit under where we should be. Typically, they do tie it to Medicare rates, so that way you can have an automatic adjustment. The last time it was adjusted was in February 22. For some reason, it didn't get done in 23. Because we had a similar thing on the books with the billing company to adjust it back in around 15 or so. And somehow it really seemed to get out of whack with this. So doing the survey and working with Dan and the Budget Task Force, we feel like this is a good place. It affects 21% of our calls, which are commercial carriers. It doesn't affect Medicare, Medicaid. It doesn't affect Blue Cross Blue Shield. It does not affect Mass Health. So it's strictly the 21% that are commercial carriers.
Okay, thanks. Any questions for the chief? Yep, Chris?
Sorry, just clarification when you say commercial carriers, what do you mean by that?
So there's like Blue Cross Blue Shield we're contracted with, so it's a set price, a list down. Medicare, Medicaid, we're mandated by federal law to take write-offs, so they already have agreed prices too. So the insurances that it's affected are those that we don't have restrictions on.
Look at tough.
Or Harvard Pilgrim, or those type of things.
So essentially, if a resident needs an ambulance and they have Harvard Pilgrim, they're going to get charged more under this proposal.
The insurance company will.
The insurance company will. The policy that the select board put out there still applies. I mean, we don't chase them if they qualify for those.
Okay, thank you.
And this brings you into line basically with what the broader surrounding communities are doing.
Right. Bedford just did theirs. We're kind of close to theirs. There's a couple of them that when we surveyed them, they said they were looking at the rates. They actually wanted a survey when we're done. So I think they're looking to adjust also.
Okay, great. Any other questions for the chief? Do I have a motion to approve the adjustment of ambulance billing rates of 400% above Medicare, set a mileage rate of $39 per mile, and to automatically increase and maintain 400% above Medicare as the rates are adjusted yearly?
So, second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any board reports or updates? Board reports or updates? Nope, okay. Minutes for approval, for release, regular session, August 21st, 2023.
Move to approve and release.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and not for release, executive session, May 5th and August 15th, 2023.
Move to approve but not release.
Second.
All those in favor? Okay. Kristen?
I'm ready. All right. So you heard earlier this evening that we're looking to make some changes to the Senior Low-Income Tax Relief Program that was approved by the legislature. The Senior Low-Income Tax Relief Committee was formed to create that legislation. Their work has clearly been done for quite some time, so this would be a request to disband that committee.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
And with thanks to the committee.
Great.
Absolutely.
The next one, we are approached by the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments to participate in their Comprehensive Safety Action Plan, which is associated with the Greater Lowell Vision Zero, so the 9 communities within the NIMCOG region. And this is really to look at high crash intersections within the region to try to mitigate for reasons to lower those crashes, increase safety in those areas. And it's a comprehensive region-wide plan to then go for grant money or other federal and state dollars related to that. The staff and I participated in a conference call related to this project 2 weeks ago and feel that we have the capacity to participate in the plan and to provide input and to hopefully get some funding for Town of Westford roads if we see fit. Town engineer Paul Sterrett did make note that he feels that the majority of the intersections that we felt were unsafe based upon data that we have been fixed or are going to be fixed, so we should be very proud of that. But we also wanted to look into this in terms of our Westford residents and business owners will be passing through intersections that may be unsafe in other municipalities that are not in Westford. So we want to make sure we have input on that as well. So we feel this is a light lift that we can accomplish in-house with this group, and we just need the board's approval to enter into this memorandum of understanding. There's no cost to the town. It's just staff participation time.
Chris?
So, not to disagree with Paul, but I mean, I think there's definitely some intersections in town that aren't necessarily as safe as we want them to be, some of which he's aware of. I mean, I know that we've had a fatality, just in the last few years up at the Route 40 in North, right? Love to see, we did an RSA there. I don't think we did a ton to address that issue. We have Plain Road and Depot. I mean, hopefully we do something there at some point. I mean, we have the project that's at West Street and Prescott right by the church, where we're interested to see some improvements there for the school-age kids that are trying to get to Blanchard and day school. That's just off the top of my head. I think the 27 and Acton Road intersection has no pedestrian accommodations for people going to the rail trail from the neighboring, community, the neighborhoods. So there's definitely work in Westford that needs to be done. And if this helps us get funding to address some of that or brings more detail into those problems, I think we definitely want to take advantage of this. But I would be surprised if this is a light lift. I would think it's going to take some time and effort on the behalf of you and the rest of the staff to do this.
Well, NIMCOG will be doing the majority of the data collection and the data analysis. They'll be obviously requesting data from the police department and the engineering department related to what we have. But we had a very clear conversation about the capacity that we had and the capacity that they have.
I would like to
project.
see us really advocate though, because if you're comparing some of our intersections necessarily to an intersection in a community that's much busier, maybe we don't have the crash rate, maybe we don't have fatalities, but for me, the death of one Westford resident is too much, right? So if it's an intersection in Westford that only has one fatality or one crash, I want that, addressed the same way maybe, we might be looking at Lowell, for example, who has much more traffic. So I love the idea. I applaud NEMCOG to try and do this, and I love the fact that you guys are doing it.
You were going to be our
I
representative.
know, how did that play out, right?
And there we go.
It all ties together, so I'll be there advocating with you guys.
There you go.
Little bow. Okay, thanks, Scott.
Just to follow up, so when you say Vision Zero, now this is, crash data is fine, but my bigger concern, I think, with Chris is the crash data, if you're in a car, you're protected. If you're the pedestrian, you aren't. So,
Right.
So they're looking at pedestrian data as well, or is this strictly?
I will
motor vehicle?
clarify for that for you. I do not
Yeah,
have that
'cause I mean, to
answer.
me, that's the biggest threat to
Sure.
safety is car versus person.
I think it says 0 fatalities or serious injuries on roadways. I don't think it's specific of vehicles or
Yeah, I mean,
pedestrians. but we
Vision
will-
Zero is supposed to be pedestrian, but.
Correct.
This one you mentioned.
Or bicyclists.
Yeah,
even.
right, yeah.
Okay, sounds like we're in consensus that we would like to support participation. So I'll entertain a motion to.
So moved.
You're so quick. Can I make the motion on this
I'm
one?
sorry, go ahead.
So moved.
Sorry.
Let the record represent.
And nobody's seconding.
Select Board Member Barrett. Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great.
Thank you very much.
No,
All right.
I'm just.
Competitive
that's all I
select
wanted.
board, that's it. That's the good thing.
Oh, no.
Getting into contracts, we have a contract for TriTech Software Central Square, which is our computer-aided dispatch software that the fire department uses to record and dispatch incidents in the amount of $10,385.65, managed by the technology department. And then tie and bond for our NIPD's Phase 2 small MS4 permit year 6 compliance assistance and the amount of $89,000 as requested by the Department of Public Works. Happy to move on to purchase
Let's
orders
keep
if
going.
you want to take it all under one. The next batch are requests by the Community Wellness Coordinator that will be funded by the opioid settlement funds, and the town meeting action says that those will be finally approved by your board. So Panorama Education for professional development training in the amount of $21,800. Cartwheel Health Services PC for medical health services and wraparound support to provide services for students and staff at Westford Academy for $15,000. And the same services to provide services to students and staff of the Neshoba Valley Technical High School in the amount of $15,000.
Can I put a hold on that panorama education just to talk about it?
Sure. The next is for funding the mobile health clinician for the amount of $10,000. There's also discussion occurring requesting funding through other arms, whether they be nonprofit grants or coming back for ARPA fundings. We're seeing a lot of success from this mobile health clinician, but we're funded through October. This $10,000 will get us a few more months, and then we'll come back to request some other potential funding mechanisms for that. The next one is the Neptune 360 Advanced Module for AMI, which is advanced metering, I believe, for subscription to meter reading for the water department, and $22,467.60. And then coastal medical billing, which is the billing service we use for ambulance transports, for the amount of $32,000.
John, why don't we go ahead and address your question for Panorama?
Well, that panorama, I looked at that, and there's no mention or anything about opiate treatment or anything close to that. It's all about, it's kind of it's the program that schools have, and we've funded that with ARPA funds before. And they're using opioid funds for this, and I'm just questioning why we'd be, I've looked at some lists of what qualifies under the opioid settlement. This didn't come on, I didn't see anything that came close to this. I know it's an important program for the schools. The question is, how do we fund it? And should we be using opioid funds for that?
So I believe that the community Wellness Committee, I might have the terminology wrong, has discussed this. I can certainly have it come back and get more information for the board if you're not comfortable.
I mean, if the other, rest of the board members want to go ahead with it, I just want to bring that up. And, because that's an important thing.
Scott?
So I have a process question. So at town meeting, we're going to approve the use of the opioid money, but we have purchase orders now. So if, hypothetically, I don't think it would, but if it were to fail town meeting, then what happens to these POs?
So, as you may recall, at the March town meeting, we approved opioid settlement funds for appropriation. Those would come out of this
Okay.
dollars. We are getting those funds in increments from the source. So each time we get it from the source, we then need to appropriate it and then come back to the board for approval. So we do have these funds on hand and on account at this time.
I guess what's the feeling of the board on this item? We could postpone it and just ask the question about appropriateness of the use of this type of funds for this purpose, or if people are comfortable with it, we can go ahead and proceed.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I
I'm
just want to bring
comfortable.
attention to you, because
Okay.
I mean, unless we're short of funding for treating opioid-related addiction issues, which doesn't sound like we are, then would it be okay? You know, if we were, then I'd say maybe we want to reevaluate this, but I don't think. Okay, so well, I'm fine.
Okay, sounds like we're comfortable proceeding. So I'll entertain a motion to approve contracts and purchase orders.
So moved.
Second.
All right, you got your second in there. All in favor?
Sounds like we're still online.
Okay.
We're still virtual.
Correspondence. Do I have a motion to?
To waive reading of correspondence.
Second.
All in favor? And do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? All right.